Hey there, before we dive into this wild sci-fi journey, don't forget to hit that like button, smash subscribe, and drop a comment below on what you'd do if an alien predator chose you as its alpha. Your support helps us bring these epic stories to life. Now let's jump into it. Daniel Grant wiped a streak of dark green mud from his cheek, squinting up through the thick emerald canopy that seemed to swallow the pale light of Vauratha's twin moons. His breath steamed slightly in the humid night air, mixing with the soft, almost electric whine of unseen creatures shifting in the undergrowth. Every rustle sounded like a whisper in a language only the jungle understood, and Daniel had been listening to it for 3 months now, every sound catalogued and memorized, every vibration noted in his field log. He wasn't a tourist. He wasn't even an ordinary biologist. Once a captain in Earth's Special Reconnaissance Units, Daniel had spent years learning to see before being seen, to breathe without leaving a trace. After the last war, he traded the stench of gun oil for the scent of alien moss and metallic pollen. He told himself he wanted peace, but deep down he craved a different kind of war, one fought with patience and instinct rather than bullets. Vaurath had promised him that. A lush moon orbiting a dead gas giant, Vaurath was an untouched cradle of life. A place where predators didn't just survive but reigned like ancient gods. At the top of that pyramid sat the Skarath, a beast whose existence was part myth, part nightmare. The few recordings showed a creature larger than an armored hover tank, its hide plated in iridescent scales that shimmered in the moonlight, eyes that glowed with a soft bioluminescent pulse. The galaxy's aristocracy loved to whisper about it, turning it into a symbol of status and power. Which is exactly why they came. A flicker of movement in the sky drew Daniel's eyes upward. 3 massive ships drifted through the atmosphere like silver predators. Their hulls gleamed with ancient alien glyphs, banners trailing beneath them in a silent, pompous dance. Each vessel belonged to an alien king, self-styled monarchs of scattered empires who lived on arrogance and blood. They believed themselves the apex of evolution, rightful rulers not only of their planets but of every living thing beneath their boots. Tonight, they had come to reaffirm that claim by subduing the Skarath in their grand ceremonial hunt. They saw it as entertainment, a trophy hunt to broadcast across their networks and palace halls. Daniel watched the ships touch down, their shimmering force fields repelling the jungle's damp air. Dozens of armored alien soldiers poured out, each one towering over Daniel by at least 2 heads. They moved with rigid confidence, each step leaving a slight static charge that set nearby insects buzzing in manic clouds. One of the kings stepped forward, his golden exosuit adorned with sharp crystalline spines that pulsed softly like a heartbeat. His head, insectal and angular, rotated slowly as if savoring the moonlit jungle before him. "Bring me the beast," the king rasped, his voice distorted through a translator but still dripping with cold amusement. Daniel hid behind a broad-leafed fern, close enough to smell the faint ozone from the king's armor. He felt the old soldier in him coil tight. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, to sabotage these fools before they hurt what they didn't understand. But he was one man, unarmed save for his recorder, his field knife, and a small set of non-lethal traps meant for documentation, not war. The aliens fanned out, dragging cages and energy nets designed to subdue rather than kill. They treated the jungle like an arena, arrogantly trampling saplings and disturbing the nocturnal rhythm. Daniel moved parallel to them, silent as moonlight. He knew the Skaratha's likely territory. He had tracked broken branches, claw gouges in stone, and that deep bass rumble that vibrated in his chest more than his ears. Tonight everything felt wrong. The jungle's usual symphony of calls and chirps had gone silent, replaced by a waiting hush. Even the air felt charged as though the entire forest held its breath. Daniel glanced up and felt his pulse quicken. A shadow moved among the canopy, massive, fluid, intelligent. The Skarath was not running. It was watching. Daniel felt his skin prickle as he realized it wasn't watching the aliens. It was watching him. He dropped to one knee, controlling his breathing. If it saw him as a threat, he wouldn't survive. If it saw him as prey, he wouldn't even have time to scream. But Daniel held its gaze. In those slow, pulsing eyes, he sensed an awareness that went beyond hunger. A nearby soldier triggered a trap. A high-pitched shriek echoed through the clearing as an energy net fired upward, slicing a lesser predator cleanly in 2 before it hit the ground. The alien soldiers laughed, a harsh, metallic chorus that grated against the jungle's natural rhythm. The king stepped forward, sniffing the air like a hound, his mandibles clicking in amusement. "Pathetic," he hissed. "These creatures are nothing but insects to us." Daniel's fingers curled into fists. He could feel the forest recoiling around them like a living thing in pain. A vibration hummed through the ground. The leaves around him quivered, and somewhere deep, the air seemed to fracture. Daniel felt his heartbeat match the heavy footfalls approaching from the north. Suddenly, silence shattered. Branches cracked like gunshots. The ground shivered under an impossible weight. Then, from between two giant fungal pillars, the Skarath emerged. Daniel swallowed hard. Up close, it was larger than any of the blurry videos suggested. Its massive shoulders rolled forward like tectonic plates, each scale shifting with quiet menace. It carried itself with the calm assurance of something that had never known fear. The alien king stepped forward, his crystalline crest glimmering. He spread his arms in a mock salute. "Bow, ancient one. Submit to your king," he commanded, voice amplified and echoing across the clearing. The Skarath tilted its head, studying the king. Its tail lashed slowly, thoughtful rather than aggressive. Daniel saw its gaze shift again, past the king, past the guards, straight to him. Daniel stood, slowly raising both hands. He didn't know what he was doing. Some old instinct guided him, an echo of nights spent on earth waiting for mountain lions to decide if he was threat or prey. He took one step forward. The king screeched in fury, pointing a clawed hand at Daniel. "You dare interfere with royal ceremony? You insignificant ape." Daniel barely heard him. All he could see was the Skarath's eyes, an ocean of deep green light, swirling with thought. For one breathless moment, the entire jungle seemed to lean in, listening. Then the Skarath lunged. Not at Daniel. At the king. The clearing exploded into chaos. Soldiers screamed as the predator tore through them with impossible speed, each movement like a crashing wave. The king staggered back, his crystal armor splitting under a swipe that could have split a starship hull. Daniel ducked as a body flew past him, crashing into a tree with a wet snap. Daniel stayed rooted in place, watching as the Skarath turned from the ruined king and swung its massive head toward him. The soldiers fled into the dark, their metal feet clanging and crackling in panic. Sparks lit the undergrowth like dying stars. For a moment, Daniel and the predator faced each other alone. The Skarath lowered its head slightly, a gesture Daniel recognized not from biology books but from somewhere older, more primal. An offering of trust. Daniel took a hesitant step forward. In the distance, the jungle slowly began to breathe again. Leaves shook off ash, small creatures resumed their cautious scuttling. The predator's breath was deep and calm now, echoing softly in the moonlit clearing. Daniel exhaled. Somewhere in the dark, he knew the surviving alien kings were regrouping. He could already feel the hatred, the hunger for revenge simmering in the humid air. But at that moment, under the faint glow of the twin moons, Daniel realized he was no longer just an observer. He was something else. The Skarath's eyes glimmered. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't move to touch it. He simply met its gaze and nodded once. The predator responded with a low, rumbling sound, not quite a growl, not quite a purr, something ancient, something that spoke of a bond not yet understood but irrevocably formed. And deep in Daniel's bones he felt the shift begin. He had no weapons, no army, no kingdom. But he had just become an alpha. And somewhere beyond the stars, someone would soon learn to fear the human at the heart of the jungle. Daniel's pulse hammered as he stood frozen beneath the moss-dripping branches. The Skarath's massive head hovered inches from his chest, its breath hot and damp against his skin. He could smell a sharp, earthy musk beneath the metallic scent of blood, as though the creature carried the entire jungle in its lungs. Its eyes, vast pools of flickering emerald light, studied him with a depth that felt almost human. Daniel forced himself to remain still, his fingers curled loosely at his sides. His mind darted through old lessons, every close encounter with predatory animals on Earth. Each moment he learned to become invisible through patience and slow breath. But this was no terrestrial beast. There was something beyond primal instinct here, a consciousness pressing against his own. The Skarath tilted its head again, a slow, deliberate motion that suggested curiosity rather than threat. Its massive shoulders rose and fell as it exhaled, mist curling around its snout. Without looking away, Daniel took a cautious step forward, careful not to break the fragile understanding holding them together. It didn't move. He took another step, the jungle underfoot whispering with crushed ferns and damp leaves. He could hear the faint hum of the alien ships beyond the trees, the crackle of distant comms as the surviving soldiers regrouped. The alien kings would be planning retaliation, their pride burning hotter than any plasma rifle. Daniel raised one hand slowly, palm open. His heartbeat pounded so hard he felt it in his fingertips. The Skarath's eyes narrowed slightly, its nostrils flaring. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought it would lunge, reduce him to a smear beneath its claws. Instead, it lowered its massive head, bringing its snout within reach. Daniel's hand trembled as it hovered over the beast's rough scales. Then, with a final breath, he touched it. The skin was warm, firm as iron beneath a layer of hard plates that shifted like living armor. A shiver ran through the Skaratha's body, as though it was discovering something long forgotten. A low sound rippled from its throat, a resonance that vibrated through Daniel's bones. He felt the echo inside his ribs, deep and wordless, a greeting or perhaps a question. Daniel pressed his palm firmly, fingers spreading to feel the subtle twitch of muscle beneath the scales. A sudden flood of images crashed into his mind. Moonlight shimmering over black water. Branches cracking under a heavy stride. Alien voices, cold and sharp, echoing off temple walls. Restraint. Loneliness, thick as night fog. Then a single flash, Daniel's face reflected in the beast's eyes, two creatures meeting beyond speech. Daniel staggered backward, clutching his head. The connection vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only a raw emptiness. The Skarath watched him, its breath steady, its tail sweeping slow arcs across the ground. Daniel tried to form words, but his throat tightened. The jungle pressed close as if listening to every labored breath. A sudden crash split the air behind him. Daniel spun, knife already half drawn from his belt. One of the alien kings burst through the foliage, armor scorched and fractured, a pulse blade crackling in his hand. His multifaceted eyes burned with searing hatred. "You dare poison the ceremony?" the king bellowed, spittle flicking from his mandibles. His voice, deep and trembling with rage, rattled the leaves. "You insignificant mammal, you twist our sacred beast against us." Daniel took a slow step back, slipping into a half-crouch, the knife steady before him. He saw the king's grip tighten, the blade pulsing brighter, thirsting for blood. The Skarath shifted behind Daniel, a deep rumble rolling through its chest like distant thunder. The king lunged. Daniel felt the air crackle as the blade swung toward his throat. Before it could close the last inch, the Skarath moved. Faster than Daniel's eye could follow, the beast's clawed hand slammed the king sideways, shattering his armor like brittle bark. The king crashed into a tree, the pulse blade dropping from limp fingers. The jungle fell silent again, the echo of violence curling away into the dark. Daniel straightened slowly, the knife still clenched tight, every muscle trembling from adrenaline. The Skarath turned its gaze on him, then glanced at the broken king and back again. Daniel lowered his knife. With slow steps, he approached the fallen king, whose breathing now came in short, rattling gasps. His insectal eyes flickered in confusion and disbelief. "You traitor! You ruined everything," the king rasped, black fluid pooling beneath him. Daniel knelt beside him, gaze level. "You never understood this creature," he said, voice low and steady. "You wanted to break it, control it. You forgot that true power isn't taken by force, it's offered." The king's eyes went glassy. One last shudder rattled his segmented body before it fell still. Daniel stood and turned toward the Skarath. It loomed above him, its bulk blotting out the moonlight, yet its presence felt protective rather than threatening. The distant sounds of the alien soldiers began to draw closer, a faint chorus of shouts and equipment clattering. Daniel could hear the heavy boots punching through undergrowth, scanners humming as they fanned out in search of their king. Daniel glanced at the fallen weapon by the king's side. He picked it up, feeling the hum of contained plasma against his palm. For a fleeting moment he considered running, vanishing deeper into the jungle. But he knew that was no longer an option. A low growl rumbled from the Skarath. Daniel turned to see its tail flick sharply toward the east, deeper into the ancient groves where the ruins lay hidden among twisted roots and towering fungi. The message was clear. Daniel nodded, gripping the blade tighter. Together, they moved into the trees, Daniel slipping between trunks as though he had done it all his life, the Skarath gliding behind him with an impossible silence for something its size. They moved past enormous stone columns half buried in vines, worn symbols spiraling up their sides, speaking of some long-forgotten people who must have once understood the Skarath. In those markings, Daniel saw shapes that resembled the creature, crowned, standing beside figures who knelt or raised hands in reverence. He felt the weight of it all settling on his shoulders, a sudden understanding blooming in his chest. The Skarath was never meant to be hunted or enslaved. It was a guardian, a force of balance in this ecosystem. Perhaps even more, a sentinel of something older than the alien kings and their shallow pageantry. Daniel paused beneath an archway where the vines parted, revealing a pool of moonlight that spilled across mossy stones. The Skarath moved beside him, lowering its head until its eyes met his once more. In that gaze, Daniel felt a warmth that frightened and exhilarated him at once, the raw certainty that this creature had chosen him. Not as a master but as an equal. A partner. Another pulse of images pressed into his mind. Alien kings cowering. Galaxies trembling. A single human standing tall beside a beast born of starlight and ancient earth. He saw himself not as a man who had simply survived the jungle, but as someone about to shape it, command it, protect it. The Skarath lowered its massive head again, breathing slow and deep, its plates shifting like tectonic plates under a restless sea. Daniel stepped forward, pressing his forehead lightly against its scaled brow. He felt its warmth, heard its low rhythmic breathing and let his own breath match. In that moment he felt the last strands of his old life, the uniform, the missions, the endless running, dissolve into the moonlit hush of the ruins. He was no longer a soldier or a scientist or a wanderer looking for something to heal his wounds. He was something new. A faint crackle echoed through the trees and Daniel stepped back, eyes snapping open. In the far darkness he saw the first flicker of alien energy weapons. The soldiers had found their king's broken armor and knew where to come. Daniel looked at the Skarath. It didn't need words to understand. With a powerful, silent turn, it began to move deeper into the ruins, each footstep a controlled ripple across moss and stone. Daniel followed close behind, pulse steady now, his fingers wrapped tight around the stolen blade. Somewhere beyond the stars, the alien kings would be waiting for news of their victory, their triumph broadcast across noble courts and decadent halls. Instead, they would receive the message of a new bond. One they had never expected. As Daniel slipped into the darkness, he felt the jungle lean closer, its whispers merging into one quiet chant. They would come for him. They would come to reclaim their power and punish his defiance. But Daniel was no longer alone. He pressed deeper into the labyrinth of ruins, the Skarath's presence a living fortress beside him. They were no longer prey. They were no longer subjects. They were becoming legend. Daniel pressed his back against the damp stone wall, the moss clinging to his uniform like a second skin. Above him, the ruins stretched into jagged spires, moonlight slipping through cracks to paint shifting patterns on the ground. Every breath echoed against the cavernous silence, each inhale weighed down by the scent of wet earth and the faint, acrid tang of alien metal. The Skarath crouched nearby, its enormous body pressed low, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. Despite its size, it moved with an impossible grace, its scales blending into the fractured architecture as though it had been born among these stones. Its low breathing hummed through the ruins, a quiet vibration Daniel felt deep in his ribs. Through the fractured archway ahead, he saw the first glimmers of alien soldiers approaching. Their armor glowed in broken pulses, each movement casting brief reflections off the slick walls. They advanced cautiously now, stripped of their king's arrogance, the jungle's earlier chaos still painted in their minds. Daniel's fingers tightened around the pulse blade he'd taken from the fallen king. The weapon felt alive in his grasp, humming like an angry wasp. He had studied the mechanics during the brief moments of hiding, a narrow energy arc designed to slice through thick exoskeletons and ship hull plating. Brutal, elegant, and ironically now his. Beside him, the Skarath shifted, tail sweeping silently across the moss, ready. Daniel leaned close, whispering into the space between them. "We can't let them regroup. If they get to their ships, they'll call reinforcements." The Skarath's eyes met his, a shimmer of understanding passing in the green depths. Daniel didn't need a reply. He already felt the creature's agreement thrumming through the air, as tangible as the blade in his hand. A sudden bark of commands rang out ahead. The soldiers fanned into the ruins, scanners sweeping arcs of cold blue light across the stones. Daniel watched them advance, each footstep echoing louder than a gunshot in the tense hush. One soldier paused near a broken pillar, his helmet tilting toward a shadow where Daniel had stood moments before. The blue beam flickered across a patch of disturbed moss, and the alien stiffened. He lifted his weapon, breath sharp through the translator grill. Before he could shout, the Skarath surged forward. It moved in a blur, a violent streak of dark scales and moonlit claws. The soldier barely turned before the predator's massive forelimbs slammed into his chest, crushing armor and bone in a single sickening crunch. Shouts exploded across the ruins. Beams of blue and green light cut through the darkness, splashing against the stone and sizzling as they struck moss and ferns. Daniel ducked, weaving between pillars, each motion a careful echo of the soldier he once was. The pulse blade sang in his hand, the arc shimmering whenever he shifted his grip. Another soldier charged from Daniel's left, weapon raised. Daniel lunged sideways, driving the blade upward through the alien's arm and into his neck. The light in the soldier's eyes flickered, his weapon dropping with a hollow clatter. Daniel shoved him aside and turned, searching for the next threat. The Skarath tore through the advancing line, its roars rolling through the ruins like thunder trapped in stone corridors. Aliens fell, limbs torn or crushed, their energy weapons shattering as the Predator's claws raked through their formation. A plasma blast seared past Daniel's ear, splashing molten stone where he'd been standing. He dropped to a knee, rolling behind a toppled statue, his breath ragged. Another shot cracked against the pillar, shards exploding in a blinding spray. Daniel swung around, hurling the pulse blade. The weapon sliced through the air, a streak of burning white, embedding into the alien's chest. The soldier crumpled, fingers spasming around his weapon before falling still. Daniel scrambled forward, retrieving the blade from the corpse, its energy core still pulsing with heat. His muscles burned, each movement scraping old wounds and memories awake. Yet beneath the fatigue, something sharp coiled inside him, a sense of raw, feral clarity. In the center of the ruins, the last handful of soldiers clustered together, their backs to a cracked wall etched with ancient glyphs. One of them raised a communicator, screeching in panicked alien syllables. Daniel didn't need to understand the words to know he was calling for help. The Skarath charged. It crashed through their barricade, claws slicing metal and bodies alike, jaws snapping down with a final terrible certainty. The communicator hit the ground, sparks flickering and dying. The quiet returned as abruptly as it had been broken. Daniel stood in the moonlit courtyard, the Predator looming beside him, its scales splattered with streaks of alien ichor. Together, they listened for movement, for any sign of retreat or ambush. Nothing. The ruins held only the ghosts of battle and the smell of scorched air. Daniel exhaled, each breath heavy with relief and dread. He stepped forward, resting a hand on the Skaratha's shoulder. The beast turned slightly, its eyes softening as they met his. A sudden image flickered across Daniel's mind, a sea of stars, countless worlds shining beyond the void. He saw alien palaces, grand halls shimmering with arrogance, alien monarchs trembling as they watched a transmission unfold. A lone human standing beside the unstoppable predator they thought they owned. He understood then that this fight wasn't just for survival. It was a message. A declaration that the galaxy's hierarchy was no longer immutable. The Skarath lowered its head, the gesture deliberate and almost solemn. Daniel felt a surge of something older than language pass between them, a shared acceptance of the path ahead. They were no longer just man and beast, soldier and predator. They were becoming something else. A force. A legend. Daniel scanned the horizon beyond the shattered walls. Somewhere in the distance, pale light glimmered where the alien ships rested, sleek silhouettes on a moonlit clearing. He knew the remaining kings would be fortifying their positions, terrified yet determined to crush this rebellion before it spread. He reached down, collecting a second energy blade from a fallen soldier. He felt the hum against his palm, stronger now, as if feeding off the certainty blooming inside him. He slipped the blade into his belt, standing taller despite the bruises painting his ribs and arms. He turned to the Skarath, voice low. "We finished this." The predator rumbled in reply, tail flicking with eager anticipation. Daniel felt the last traces of doubt slide away. He had come to Valrath as a quiet observer, a man who wanted to disappear into green shadows and endless night. Instead, he had become something far more dangerous. Together, they stepped into the moonlight beyond the ruins, each stride echoing through the silent grove. The jungle seemed to lean in around them, the heavy air trembling with a quiet reverence. As they moved toward the ships, Daniel felt the truth settle into his bones. This was no longer a fight over a single predator or a broken hunt. This was the beginning of something much larger, a challenge hurled into the void where monarchs and warlords thought themselves untouchable. He felt the weight of the stars on his shoulders, heavy yet exhilarating. For the first time in years he felt truly alive. No command chain above him. No war council to answer to. Only the bond at his side and the thrum of destiny in his chest. He glanced at the Skarath one last time. Its head swung toward him, eyes burning softly with an intelligence that no cage could ever contain. Daniel tightened his grip on the blade, the glow outlining his fingers. The creature's tail lashed, sending loose stones skittering across the ground. They moved as one, slipping through the trees like a living shadow and its echo. In the clearing ahead, the alien kings waited behind their shimmering shields and stacked weapon crates, surrounded by trembling retainers. Daniel could already feel the electric scent of their fear drifting through the undergrowth, thin and sour. Tonight they would learn what it meant to face a true alpha. Daniel's breath slowed. Every sense expanded outward, the jungle's pulse merging with his own heartbeat. Together they advanced, leaving the ruins behind like a grave for an old world. The future, lit in cold starlight and hot breath, waited for them beyond the final line of trees. Daniel moved through the last line of trees, each footstep measured and silent, every sense sharpened beyond human limit. Beside him, the Skaroth slipped forward, a mountain of muscle and scales that radiated silent purpose. Moonlight slid along its ridged spine, turning it into a living blade, a creature forged in the dark for a single moment of revelation. Beyond the foliage, the clearing burned with artificial light. The alien kings had erected a ring of portable shields, flickering walls of blue energy forming a temporary fortress. Their soldiers moved inside like ants under glass, stacking crates of plasma rifles, calibrating turret guns, screaming commands in crackling alien tongues. Above them, the ships pulsed with readiness, engines humming as though they sensed the danger creeping ever closer. Daniel paused, studying the scene. He saw 3 kings standing at the center, each wrapped in ornate armor that shimmered with gold and violet veins. Their heads tilted sharply, mandibles clicking in heated argument. Even from this distance, Daniel could see the fear twitching in their limbs, the frantic energy of rulers who felt their power slipping through trembling claws. He turned to the Skaroth, meeting those endless green eyes. A surge of memories washed over him. The first breath in the jungle, the moment their bond had formed in moonlight and blood, the silent agreement that he would no longer hide in shadows. He felt every scar on his body burn with a new purpose, each old wound a promise that tonight would be different. Daniel nodded once, a subtle invitation. The Skaroth tilted its head, eyes narrowing with fierce clarity. Without a sound, it began to circle left, disappearing into the dense brush to flank the alien fortress. Daniel waited until its massive shape melted into the undergrowth, then shifted forward, low and patient, each step guided by instincts born on Earth and reforged in Varetha's wild heart. As he approached the outer shields, 2 alien sentries glanced in his direction, their scanners sweeping in frantic arcs. Before they could react, Daniel lunged forward. The pulse blade flashed in his hand, slicing through the first guard's throat in a single fluid motion. He pivoted, ramming the blade through the second guard's abdomen, twisting it free before the alien's dying gasp echoed through the clearing. He slipped inside the shield perimeter, stepping over the collapsing bodies. Heat waves rolled off the energy fields, the air crackling around him. In the center of the fortress, the kings turned in unison, their mandibles flaring wide, their eyes widening in disbelief. Daniel raised the blade, its glow cold and hungry. The kings shouted orders. Soldiers scrambled, lifting rifles that spat searing light across the clearing. Daniel dropped, rolling between crates, each shot a roaring hiss that sliced open the air above his back. He rose behind a turret, drove the pulse blade into its power conduit, and ducked as it exploded, showering molten shards across shrieking soldiers. Then the forest itself roared. The Skaroth erupted from the treeline, a thunderous blur of claws and teeth. It hit the outer line of soldiers like a living hurricane, scattering them into heaps of torn armor and split metal. Its tail swung in wide arcs, crushing bodies, smashing rifles, sweeping tents into fiery ruin. Daniel surged forward. He vaulted over broken crates, driving his blade into any soldier that turned to face him. Blood and sparks splashed against his skin, each clash igniting something deep inside, the part of him that had been forged in old wars, the part that had always known this was his true battlefield. He closed on the kings, who now stood in a defensive triangle, shields shimmering at their wrists, claws extended. One king stepped forward, his voice a wet snarl. "You dare," the king hissed, his translator distorting the words into a hideous echo. "You are nothing but flesh and bone, a pet hiding behind a beast." Daniel's eyes narrowed. Not hiding. Leading. He dashed forward. The first king swung his claws wide, but Daniel ducked beneath the arc, driving the blade up under the king's chest plate. Sparks showered as the blade cut through alien metal and flesh, the king's shriek dying in a wet gurgle. The second king lunged from behind, claws poised to rip Daniel's spine open. Before they could land, the Skaroth barreled into him, jaws clamping around the king's midsection, lifting him off the ground. The creature shook its massive head once, twice, until the king's armor and body split in a single grotesque bloom. Daniel turned toward the last king. The alien staggered backward, eyes wide and glassy. He raised a plasma pistol, hands trembling. Daniel took a slow step forward. The king fired, but the shot veered wide, scorching empty air. Daniel advanced again, each step unhurried, inevitable. "Mercy," the king screeched, mandibles scraping the air. "We can rebuild your world, give you riches beyond imagining. We." Daniel swung the blade upward, severing the king's arm at the elbow. The pistol fell uselessly, clattering against scorched ground. Daniel stepped in close, pressing the blade against the king's throat. "You had your chance to show mercy," Daniel said, voice quiet, controlled. "You hunted for sport. You ruled through fear. Now you kneel." He pushed forward. The blade cut through the king's throat with a hiss, the alien's final breath spilling out in a sick, rattling cough. The king fell forward, head rolling against Daniel's boots. The clearing fell silent but for the flickering fires and the ragged breaths of dying soldiers. Daniel turned, scanning the field. The Skarath stood in the moonlight, dripping with blood and ash, its chest heaving in slow, triumphant waves. It watched Daniel, eyes gleaming with something deeper than hunger, pride, perhaps even reverence. Daniel climbed onto a fallen crate, his silhouette thrown high by the dancing fires. He looked toward the alien ships, knowing that cameras and scanning arrays across the galaxy were locked onto this moment, broadcasting to every hall and throne room where kings believed themselves immortal. He raised the bloodied blade overhead. The Skarath let out a roar that shattered the night, a sound that reverberated through the bones of every watching creature, near or far. Daniel lowered his arm and spoke, voice carrying clear and sharp across the smoldering ruin. "Tell them. The age of kings is over. The predator has chosen. The galaxy will learn to kneel or be devoured." In the shadows beyond the ships, Daniel saw flashes of alien soldiers fleeing into the trees, discarding weapons, stumbling through ash and root. They would carry the story. They would spread the terror faster than any transmission. Daniel stepped down from the crate, his breath heavy, his mind still thrumming with the Skaratha's presence. He approached the creature slowly. It lowered its head, breathing warm clouds into his face. Without hesitation, Daniel placed his hand against its brow, feeling the pulse beneath the scales, a living drumbeat that matched his own. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to dissolve around them, replaced by a limitless expanse of starlight and jungle canopy, endless paths stretching toward distant worlds. In that vision, Daniel saw himself striding forward, the Skarath beside him, their bond an unbreakable thread that would strangle old empires and inspire new legends. Daniel pressed his forehead against the creature's skull. He felt the last shards of the old soldier slip away, the last pieces of the quiet scientist dissolve. He was neither and both, something new rising from blood and moonlight. The Skarath rumbled softly, a sound like thunder rolling far across distant valleys. Daniel stepped back and turned toward the ships. Their hulls gleamed under the pale moons, abandoned now, waiting for new masters. He felt the weight of choice pressing against his chest, heavy as an entire sky. He could leave Valrath, claim the ships, take the fight to the stars. Or he could remain here, build a new sanctuary where the predator ruled and the jungle answered to no crown. He glanced at the Skarath, the answer already waiting in its unblinking eyes. Daniel nodded once, a silent promise passing between them. Together they stepped forward, leaving the clearing behind. Each stride carried them beyond old stories, beyond thrones and gilded halls, into a future defined not by dominion but by bond. In the jungle's hush, the echoes of the night's final roar still trembled among the leaves, a signal to every living thing. The Alpha had risen, and with him, a new order. Daniel looked once over his shoulder, seeing the smoldering fortress and the pale shapes of ships resting like fallen idols. He turned away, his heart steady, his path clear. Beside him, the Skarath matched his pace, a silent guardian under starlight. And somewhere in the vast dark beyond Valratha's skies, the galaxy shivered, feeling the first breath of a storm that would change it forever.